Hillary S. Webb, fascinating woman. She's an author. She's a professor. She's an anthropologist. She spent time. We talk about one of her books that I was most interested in when she was in. She goes to Peru, talks to a shaman, and talks about the viewpoint. They have this philosophy of the dance. Instead of kind of competing with each other, there's a dance that happens, a synchronicity, some harmony, and what happens there is just fascinating. The people that are there. We talk about the a certain ceremony where there's mescaline in this cactus, and it's a hallucinogenic experience, and what happens there. Such a fascinating woman. We then years later, she's kind of fed up with what's happening in the political scene in our country. She goes to Berlin, and she's going to theater and decides to kind of pop in a comedy club, and discovers her next book, and finds that the diversity and what's happening in this culture of comedians in Berlin in Europe is just fascinating. And she talks about it, and just a great discussion on people, and where they are and where we are. I really enjoyed the time. Just flew by with Hillary. Just we talk about being a professor as well, and her viewpoint on discipline. Again, we talk about that. Is it relevant? Is there love involved? Is there compassion involved? Is it militant? Everybody has such a different definition, and I love exploring that, and talking to Hillary. It was wonderful, and I know you're going to enjoy it too. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic. I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business? And it lasted over 25 years. Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family, and their passion, and their careers, and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration.
Nice.
Hillary, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. What should we know? I want to say American public, but just what should I know? What should we know about anthropology?
Oh, well, there are different kinds of anthropology. So,
Mm,
anthropology does tend to be a fairly large umbrella term for the study of humanity and who we are as people. I'm a cultural anthropologist.
mm,
More specifically, I would call myself a psychological anthropologist because I'm really interested in how people around the world make meaning of their existence.
mm,
I'm very interested in existential psychology. And so I tend to come at the study of anthropology from the sort of the existential questions that we all have about who we are, why we're here, and how we get through life with as much love, peace, sanity, how we go through conflicts, how we handle the perspective of our death, that kind of thing. All those fun
mm.
questions about who we are and what we do and how we do it.
So not the most recent, the one before that. You talk about you're in Peru. You talk about talking with a shaman, and I mean, just paint a picture for us. What is that like? The culture there and the people. It must be wonderful.
Wonderful. I mean, Peru is a really magical place because, I mean, I think it does have, as I understand it, of all the countries in the world, it's got every single one of the climates you can possibly have. So there's
Hmm.
something for everyone there. There is desert, there is jungle, there's high mountains, there's the low plains, wonderful people. So I went there, probably, I think my first trip to Peru was in about 2000. And I went because I had just gotten involved in the study of shamanism, and
Right.
somebody I knew was taking a group down there. So I decided, okay, what the heck, I'll go. And during this time, part of the purpose of the trip was we were going to study with some shamans down there. And shamans tended, being I say shaman, it's a very, again, an umbrella term
Yes,
for
please.
the, I guess what we'd say in the language is always changing. So, you know, take it with this all with a grain of salt. The indigenous spiritual practices around the world, which tend to be very earth centric, which tend to be very harmonious with the cycles of nature
Hmm.
and with the spirits, and a belief in the ability to transform the world through some thought and through magical practices, ritual, all that. So Peru, of course, has its own name for its different kinds of healers, and that again depends on whether you're in the jungle or in the mountains or wherever you are. So I just use the term shaman as kind of a blanket term. And we were sitting with a shaman doing a despacho, which is a ritual for the feeding of Mother Earth.
Hmm.
Beautiful. It's almost like create the creation of a mandala, and the shaman takes a big piece of white paper and places upon it flowers and confetti and llama fat and llama fetus and little icons of houses and a fake dollar bill, all to represent things that we want to manifest in our life. And one of the final things that he put in this despacho was a little figurine, and it was split down the middle. One half was yellow, one was pink. And he said, "This is Yanantin, complementary opposites." And there was something about that phrase that really struck me, this idea of complementary opposites and what that meant in terms of the indigenous Peruvian Andean outlook. And when it came time a few years later for me to start my doctoral work and my doctoral research, it was one of those things kind of like a splinter in my brain. I wanted to know more about it, and this was a perfect excuse. My doctoral dissertation I was a psychology major, but had a lot of flexibility to bring anthropology into that.
Hmm.
So I spent 3 years traveling back and forth from the United States down to Peru, working with shamans down there, asking them questions about what does it mean to live in an existence in which the opposites of existence are seen as being in a dance rather than as being in a battle for one trying to dominate the other. It tends to be the sort of more Western
Right.
perspective. And I was just completely charmed, and it really did change my life in a lot of ways in terms of how I look at the world now. And that is what, for me, what's so exciting about anthropology is, we whatever culture we come from, and of course there are always cultures within cultures within cultures, so you can't even just say American culture.
Hmm.
But whatever culture you come from, it's like looking out a window of a house and you've got one view, and it could be a beautiful view and a very helpful view, but it's not the only view. And I feel that one of the real benefits of anthropology is that we get to learn how other cultures do life, how they make meaning of their existence in the world, and by learning that, it gives us opportunities to kind of draw back our own blinders and put more tools in our toolbox.
And how did you find the shaman? Did you Google search? Like what? And do they have advertising?
Some of them do. I have to say, well, you can't at this point. It's because shamanism has become quite popular, especially down
Hmm.
in Peru. There are some wonderful shamans who are advertising. I would say at the time I went down, I probably, if somebody were advertising, I might steer clear,
Hmm.
possibly. I was really fortunate in that I knew people who knew people. So
See.
I had a wonderful mentor guide whose his name's Puma Quispe, but in my book, Yanantin and Masintin in the Andean World, I call him Amado. I give everybody alternate names.
Mm.
And he speaks English perfectly, he speaks Quechua perfectly, and he speaks Spanish perfectly. So he was able to be both a resource in terms of his understanding of this concept of Yanantin, complementary opposites, and also could introduce me to all kinds of other people who could give their perspective and act as translator and then sort of act as a co-researcher in a lot of ways because he
Hmm.
could then comment upon what other people were saying as well.
And the shaman, they speak English?
Well, the shaman that I worked with primarily, Puma slash Amato, speaks English perfectly.
Right.
Most don't.
I see.
Many are starting to.
Mm.
His native language is Spanish and Quechua. So typically, at least in the high Andes where I was studying, Quechua is the main language, and then of course Spanish being either the secondary or the primary language, depending on where people are located. Of course, the mountain people tend to speak Quechua. The people in the cities tend to speak Spanish mostly, but it's a mix.
I misunderstood. So I assume he's a male,
Mhm.
Puma, uh, he was the shaman or he was the local who got you in touch with the shaman?
Both. So he is a shaman
Oh,
himself. His grandfather was a shaman,
wow.
and Puma was actually struck by lightning 3 times as a child. And his grandfather said, "Okay, babe, you're up.
Wow.
You're the next shaman in the family." And they had to actually train in secret at that time because for many years the indigenous practices were seen as either witchcraft and bad dark
Hmm.
magic or just grandfather and his silly rituals. We're modern now. But really, I would say partly due to the interest of Westerners like me going down to Peru, many more of the younger people are becoming very interested in it, and the old
Hmm.
ways are coming back.
And what did his training involve? Certainly, there's not written material, right? How does he get trained?
By example in a lot of ways,
Wow.
by his grandfather certainly leading by example. His grandfather taught him how to create these despachos, these ritual practices, and yeah, it was passed down through a long lineage of just mentoring.
But and this is a terrible Western question, but did he have a job as well? Was he also a have a career and do this?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, up until the point that this became his career, he was also working for his family in the fields in
I
Chinchero
see.
and growing potatoes. And I believe uh, they were selling some kind of tourist items in the markets. So, and even even his shamanic practices were, as he was growing up, were hidden even from his own parents, I believe.
Wow.
So he definitely had to sort of sneak under the radar in many ways and live a above the radar life as well as below the radar.
And was there a point where he kind of came out of the closet where he said, "This is me, and this is what I'm doing, and accept me or not," to his parents and to others?
Yeah, I don't know the exact story, and I think rather than it being, I don't think rather than being like one day he came out and said, "Hello, I'm a shaman."
Mm,
I think it was more a little by little letting
I
them see what
see.
he did. I think it was also history and his own personal history sort of went like this, where he was sort of coming out in as a shaman at the same time that shamanism was becoming much more respected and part of their own life and lifestyle, and then beginning to understand what it was and respecting it. And of course, always helps if you're making money at something. Your parents are going to start to,
Mm,
all actors say their parents were scared to death for them until
that's
they
right.
started making money, and then
That's
they were
right.
thrilled.
Our history is filled with that. You
Yeah.
mentioned, like, black magic at one point. I mean, did he perform, like, magic? Were there supernatural, events that occurred around him?
He has a lot of great stories, and I would not dare to
Mm.
try to recreate them because I think I would do a terrible job. Of course, the opposite, quote unquote, of a shaman is a sorcerer,
Hmm.
which is tends to be someone who is working for this is a very bad way of putting it, I think. But if a shaman is creating healing, then maybe the sorcerer is creating curses and things like that.
Interesting.
But Puma has a very wonderful thing to say about curses. And he says if somebody curses you, you should thank them
Hmm.
because it's free energy. They're sending you energy for you to do whatever you want. It's your choice to accept if you want to take that as damaging energy or positive energy. And I just thought that was, one of those things that I keep in my toolbox.
That's
Because in a lot of
wonderful
ways,
to
I
know.
think I think there's a way you can almost make a parallel. It's not exactly the same, but if somebody's gossiping about you, that's
Right.
almost a kind of a curse. Or if your parents tell you, you're no good at math, therefore you can never be an engineer, that's a curse. So what
Hmm.
do you do with that information?
And of course, we always hear stories about people get, cancer or terminal illness, but they have a time to say goodbye to everybody. So they, this is a blessing. I get to,
Mhm.
say goodbye and, continue on. So it's very interesting parallel and perhaps something with the opposites as part of
Exactly.
their culture.
Yes.
At one point, you mentioned that you asked, I assume it's to Puma to kind of define the Yanantin
Mhm.
culture, and
Mhm.
he said, "With much respect, I don't really define it, just kind of figure it out." It's fascinating.
Actually, what he said, this was the first day I landed in Peru, in Cusco, and I'm sitting with Puma on the bench, and I'm being a good doctoral student, and I pull out my notebook and my pen, and I go, "Okay, how
Yeah.
do you define Yanantin?" And he said, "Well, princesa," because he calls all the women princesa. He says, "Out of respect, I don't define Yanantin. Instead, let me suggest that you download it from the cosmos."
Right.
And I went, "But how do I cite that?"
How do I cite that in the bibliography, in the footnotes?
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly, moment of Western panic, and I'm like, "Okay, what do you mean by that?" And his suggestion was that I go into ceremony with him and a friend of his, that another shaman that he works with the mescaline cactus San
Yes.
Pedro.
Let's talk about this.
Yeah. And, I mean, of course, I'd had experience with psychedelics before. It was usually not in a ceremonial I won't
Mm,
even say it was never in a ceremonial context. It was
certainly.
more like, let's have fun on a Friday night when you're in college,
Recreational.
and
Sure.
exactly. And, there's something to be said for that as well.
Certainly.
But, to part of it was, can I really gain information in that way? And there was that
Mm.
Western doubt. No way. I mean, maybe other people can, maybe they can because 'cause they're special people. But how am I gonna download any useful information that I need if I'm in the middle of a psychedelic journey? And so I thought about it for a little while and finally said, "Okay, let's do this." And I ended up having a remarkable experience and wrote a whole chapter, actually more than one chapter, a few chapters on the things that I learned through the medicine of San Pedro about this concept of complementary opposites.
It's amazing to me, and it's a common practice there.
Yes. Yes.
And is it done in times of pain or in times of celebration? Is it a particular, how often does it happen?
I can't say how often, I don't know. It's a ceremonial tool. It's a
Mm.
tool for both the shaman and the client, let's say, or the person in need of some sort of healing or revelation
Ah,
to, step out of an ordinary way of looking at the world and have an opportunity to see the world slightly differently, to kind of loosen up the rigid mind and allow new information to come in. And it was strange. I mean, I don't do a lot of sort of how do I want to put this, magical thinking, and maybe that's not the
mm.
right way to put it either. But somehow, every time I had a question that I brought with me into a San Pedro experience, it was answered fully and completely,
Wow.
and in a way that often didn't wasn't just about what I was thinking, but required people from the outside to come in and just say things spontaneously that were like, "That's it."
Amazing. And the relationship between I almost want to say patient. I don't know what the
Mhm,
between the person talking to the shaman and the
mhm.
shaman. Is it that? Is do they have appointments? Do they does the shaman hold ceremony at a particular time each week? How does the relationship occur?
It's different for every single shaman, it's yeah, there are I know, there are some shamans who will, sort of have appointments,
Right.
scheduled appointments,
Hmm.
and sometimes it happens spontaneously. It really is very loose, or actually, I shouldn't even say it's always loose, it's always everything. It's
Hmm.
not structured the way it is here, so it can happen in any kind of way, yeah, depending on circumstance. So it's very hard to answer how it happens because it happens in so many different ways. There's so many different healing modalities between shamans and within shamans. A shaman may do like an egg cleansing on one patient and some sort of stone alignment on another patient.
Wow.
So, yeah, there's so many techniques.
So the shaman will recommend you need the masculine mescaline bearing cactus. They'll actually recommend that.
Some do. I mean, again, it depends if it's one of their tools.
Mm.
In my case, Puma really was like, okay, if you're going down this intellectual path, you can't expect to find everything you need from books or even from having one-on-one conversations. You need
Hmm.
to develop a relationship with what he called the universe and where all the answers reside.
Wow.
Yeah.
And even the term download is such a technical, 20th century, very technical term. And it's fascinating that he used that word.
Yeah, well, these guys are, they are modern people. These are, we're not talking about people I found. I had to hike days into the jungle. They live in just
Mm.
outside Cusco. They've got their cell phones. They've
Wow.
got, they've got modern amenities. So, and they know. I would say there, especially with someone like Puma, who interacts with a lot of Western folks bringing in new ideas, and he reads and he listens. He definitely uses metaphors from Buddhism,
Hmm.
from technology, from wherever he can get his hands on. And that is one thing I noticed about, I would say, certainly shamanism in the Cusco area, is that they have had so many influences from just Western tourists to 500 years ago when the conquistadors came in and
Mm.
started bringing in their religion. And rather than a conversion, there's been a adoption, a syncretism of many things, and that continues today in terms of the metaphors they use, like download.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how is he dressed commonly?
Oh, he wears jeans and a t-shirt.
He does.
When he's in ceremony, he'll often wear, usually wear the poncho with the I think it's chuya hat with the pom poms hanging down. So he's got his street clothes and his ceremonial clothes.
Absolutely amazing. Fascinates me. And did you talk to other shaman? Were there big differences between them?
Well, interestingly, so my focus was on this idea of Yanantin. So that was
Mm.
really, if I was looking for differences, it was in terms of that. And I would
Hmm.
say, really no. I worried what would happen if everybody gave me a different answer or gave
Mm.
me, too many alternate things. But really, their perspective on this idea that the world is in a dance rather than a battle
Right.
was very consistent and very, very exciting to witness.
And they see harmony in everything. It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
They
go ahead, please.
Now I was gonna say they actually have a four-stage process that will take a they see a relationship going from antagonistic or potentially antagonistic to complementary in four stages. And let's see if I can remember all of them. The first one is tupai, and that's the meeting. That's the first time, let's say, two people meet each other.
Hmm.
And there's this split second where it's just a pure meeting. You're not looking at somebody and saying, "Oh, you remind me of that girl I dated in high school, and she broke up with me, and now I don't like you that much." It's like all
Mm.
these sort of superpositions come in, but it's that split second of just the meeting. Then there's Tinqui, which is the testing of boundaries, and it's best describes sort of the battling and the lovemaking. It's the
Wow.
exchange of energies. It's trying to find, where do I begin and you end? Do I like you? What parts of you do I like? What parts do I not? How do you fill in the gaps where I leave off? It's this engagement. The next one is Takai, which is the union, and that's when those two people have figured out, they've dropped this kind of war mentality, and they are acting as a union, and they are one's strengths pick up where the other leaves off, and this is when they are sort of the most benefit to their community, is when
Hmm.
they're in this state of take. Then the final one is tinkwi, which is, no, excuse me, truhi, when the pair separates, because all pairs will eventually separate. And even though they're separate, they're always together because they become such a part of each other. And it's just a very beautiful model for
Yes.
it. Kind of, for me, it makes, especially the tinkwi phase, where there's the fighting and the high energy, it takes the sort of this is personal out of it, and makes it, okay, this is part of the process. The tension is necessary and good to move you to the next stage.
Hmm. Yeah, that is absolutely wonderful. So, at this point, how would you define Yanantin?
Yeah, I love the idea of complementary opposites is a good way, and
Hmm.
it is looking at the world as a dance rather than a conflict. And I think that's something we could all use a little bit of these days,
Yes.
or maybe a
Yes.
lot of, as there is so much conflict and so much divisiveness.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrible. And do you see that? It seems so simple, but if we could adopt this philosophy and this way of doing, way of working together, do they do a good job of that in Peru? Is there a lot of divisiveness there?
Yeah, it's like anywhere. You've
Mm.
got it all. And the divisiveness is part of the Tinqui process as well. So they have every flavor. It's not There's no utopia. Utopia does not exist.
It
And
doesn't exist.
maybe utopia shouldn't exist.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, maybe it shouldn't. Very, very interesting. And do you think, I mean, can we get this kind of philosophy? Can we get this kind of insight here in the States at all? Are there teachers of it?
Hmm.
We have a lot of First Nation here. I know very little about it
Yeah, and I don't know a lot about First Nation, Native American
here.
work either. A dear friend of mine, Four Arrows, with his co-author Darshan Narvaez, wrote a book, beautiful book, that he actually very kindly used some of my work in on Yanantin. I think it's called Rekindling the Native Worldview, or it's something like that.
Hmm.
And in it, they both really outline a beautiful, they're both Native American, and they outline a sort of a very beautiful system for how we might live in a world in a more gentle, kinder, more complementary way. So I
Hmm.
know those ideas are certainly there. I just personally haven't investigated them to any degree.
Oh my goodness. The good news is that it is out there, and you just need to find it. But you wonder sometimes if people actually want to. Like you said, should utopia exist?
Right. And let's face it, sometimes getting through those four stages is
Mm,
a lot of work.
yeah,
I think that, especially in our, you got to express yourself in what, 150 characters or less kind of
that's right.
world. It's all too easy to get stuck in the tinkwy phase, where you're just
Mm.
shouting your opinions at someone. There's not an opportunity to kind of have those discussions and have those moments that bring you into that third stage of take, of union, of finding where I begin and you end.
Hmm.
So
S- So sometime later, you're frustrated with the current political scene and what's happening. You find yourself in a comedy club in Berlin, in a
yes, which
basement in a Berlin, and what happens there?
Yeah, yep, okay, so, which seems like the opposite of Peru, but it's actually
Yes.
not.
Really?
It actually all sort of does tie together. Yeah, around 2017, like a lot of people, I was feeling just very frustrated, depressed about the state of the world and this divisiveness, and are we human beings ever going to really be able to get ourselves out of the mess that we are in on so many levels?
Mm,
Do we have the psychological capacity to really get along? So I needed to get out of town. I hadn't taken a vacation in a long time, so I booked myself a week in Berlin because I had been wanting to go to Berlin for a really long
me
time. I'm a
too.
huge fan of experimental theater, and
Mm,
Berlin is great for experimental theater. So I went booked myself for about like 5 shows while I was there, and there was one night that I had completely free and didn't know what to do with myself. So I Googled what's going on in Berlin tonight. And the first thing that came up was an ad for this place called Cosmic Comedy, free shots and pizza. So, like, all right, and I have to,
what can you lose? What can you lose?
sold, sold.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I was never really a fan of stand up comedy. I loved funny
Interesting.
people. Yeah, I loved funny people. But stand up comedy to me always felt, I'm a sensitive little bird and
Mm,
I was a little too mean, especially the way it's practiced in, the States. It's often what's called bear pit comedy.
mm.
And I thought, all right, well, it's not really my thing, but maybe stand-up comedy is the opposite of experimental theater, and this will just be a good palate cleanser, and then I can go see the rest of my shows and really
Hmm.
get a lot out of them. So anyway, so I went to this basement where there's a stage and people from all over the world in the audience, and that was, I live in Maine in the United States. There's not a lot of cultural diversity here. So it's always really wonderful to go to Europe and see what an international party it is. And you've
Hmm.
got in this basement audience members from all around the world speaking every different language and having a good time. And then the show begins. And on stage, you have a comedian from Mexico, from Iceland, from Canada, from Germany, from Croatia, from
Hmm.
Mexico. And each one of them in some way talking about themselves as a cultural being and what it's like to be who they are at this time in history, and being say a Mexican in Berlin,
Hmm.
what that cultural confluence is like. And I just sat there listening and feeling, and people laughing and being and cheering and being really supportive of people. Even, lots of people hadn't never been up on stage before. So everybody being very kind and very warm and supportive. And I thought, this is what the world should be. And as an anthropologist, just completely fascinated with how people can talk about their own culture through the use of humor, and how people
Mm.
talk about very dark subjects through the use of humor. And it has this dual use of both being funny, but heartbreaking, but funny, but
Mm.
heartbreaking and educational as well. And it was my favorite part of the whole trip. And 2 months
Hmm.
later, I came back. I got in touch with the guys who run the comedy club. And yeah, 2 months later, came back. I spent a month there, left, came back for another month, left, came back for another month,
Wow.
and went and sat and watched shows and interviewed the comedians, interviewed audience members, interviewed the guys that run the club about. And I should say, these guys who run the club, Neil and Darmander, have specifically created what they seek to be the friendliest comedy club in Europe.
Hmm.
So they go out of their way to create what in anthropology is called communitas, or collective joy. So that was my research subject, which is how do these two guys, how do Darmander and Neil create, evoke, liberate, whatever, what's their secret sauce for the creation of collective joy? So that was what my new book is about.
And your opinion and your view of stand-up comedy would radically change during these views. I mean, because you really didn't care for it before.
Yeah, I mean, I love it there. And I
Mm.
has my opinion as a whole I mean, it's not that I dislike it, and I like a lot of it. It was specifically there in the former East Berlin with an international group of people in this place that sought to be so friendly and warm and inviting, and allowing people to get up on stage and fail miserably
Hmm.
and still have that be okay, which is something I think is also missing in a lot of places,
Yes.
is that supportive atmosphere where each of us can get out there and be a total mess and have that be okay.
And was everything in English?
Yes, everything was in English.
And did all of them have stories of their fight, of their challenges, or just some just telling jokes?
Some people were telling jokes that could have been told anywhere.
I
I
see.
would say, though, the majority was people talking about where we are in history, the political situation.
Hmm.
There, I won't try to recreate her joke because I'm a terrible joke teller.
Oh, yeah.
But this is an example of one that really struck me as being, again, funny, but sad, heartbreaking, but wonderful and educational. There was a very talented comedian from Beirut, from Lebanon, and she would tell this story of how she used to work in an office that was very European, all Germans. And she would be the exotic one, and she liked that. And then she got transferred to a new office that was full of international people from around the world. And on her first day, they asked her, "How many wars have you survived?" And she said, "Just one." And they said, "Three's the minimum here, bitch."
Wow.
So she said that, of course, the way I'm saying it, it's
Yes.
it's not funny. She said
Right.
it in a way, of course, it's also, context along
Of
with
course.
content and being in a,
Yes.
so, and of course, how to the degree to which that story is true, unlikely that it's actually true, but
Right.
so the way she delivered it, very funny. And also, as a person who has had this incredibly privileged upbringing, peaceful living in Little Maine,
Hmm.
it gave me this opportunity to go, wow, yeah, there are people in the world who have lived through war after war after war. So it's funny the way she says it, and it's also true and heartbreaking. And
Hmm.
for me, that's the recipe for my, if not enjoyment, it fills me with a compassion that I hadn't been faced with prior to that. And I think sometimes humor is such a wonderful way of learning harsh truths.
Hmm. Yeah, why let the truth get in the way of a really good story or joke, you know?
Yeah.
And did you find that these stand-up comedians were also philosophers?
Hmm. Interesting. I don't know if any of them would necessarily call themselves philosophers. However, what I would say, the thing about comedy is you have to stop a thought in a way.
Mm,
You have to recognize things that most of us just kind of like roll over in our daily life. You have to be aware and so present to the contradictions that are going on out there, to the absurdities that are going on out there, to the twists of phrase and, not taking things literally. So in that way, I think it is very close to philosophy in the sense of you're looking around corners, you're playing three-dimensional chess in a way that
mm.
most of us walking around aren't necessarily doing.
It's true. I just happened to finish a documentary on George Carlin, and he was such a wordsmith. I mean, this he particularly would practice, and he would write everything himself, and remove words and add words, and constantly kind of work towards it. It's hard. It seems like it's hard work, and in his particular case, he did a lot of writing with it too. I wonder with the comedians that you saw, were any of them looking to become professional comedians?
I think it was a mix. There are definitely a contingent of comedians out there that are trying to do that professionally. There were
Mm,
definitely a lot of people that got up on stage just because they wanted to try it. It was,
mm,
sure, this is a friendly, nice place to do it. I've always wanted to try it. Let's see where this goes. And for many of them, one and done, two and done, whatever.
mm.
Interestingly, Berlin has become a real hotspot for the training of comedians because in
Really?
Berlin, yeah, Berlin, unlike, as I understand it, unlike perhaps like New York or London, where you're lucky if you get one gig a month
Right.
to practice, to be up in front of people. In Berlin, there are so many comedy clubs now. There are so many shows each. I mean, you could go to two shows. If you could be in two places at once, you could probably go to two shows a night for a week
Hmm.
in Berlin. So, and actually, some comedians will run from show to show to show. So they are getting a crash course in stand-up comedy basically by being in Berlin because it's
Mm,
still fairly relatively cheap to live there, and the artists are still, you can still be a bartender 3 nights a week and still, live,
nice.
and do your art. So yeah, it's an exciting place to be if you're a comedian, and really a lot of people are um, getting really good.
Now, through watching all this and through your interviewing them, did you kind of think of a couple of jokes yourself?
Not really.
Really?
No, no. I mean, I'm an avid audience member, I have to
Mm,
say. I had a lot of folks say, "So when are you gonna get up there?" And I'm
mm,
like, "I'm not gonna get up there." And, I, of course, I had to think to myself, now, am I just chickening out? Should I
mm.
be more disciplined and,
Oh.
yeah, I think and, like, work through whatever fear I have of being on stage? And as I sat with it, I'm like, "Yeah, I just don't want to. That's not what I do." I consider myself a professional audience member, and I
Hmm.
love that. And I do think, interestingly, hearing over and over again, "Why aren't you getting up there?" It makes me a little sad that the audience has been downgraded to second class citizen in a way. So I'm
Uh,
sort of now on a mission to eh, create respect for the audience in a way that I think isn't really there. And part of my book, because my book is what I call an anthropological memoir. So it's a lot about my story too, in addition to their story of what is it to be, I'm an introvert. I can be very shy at times. What is it to be part of collective and part of a collective joy, and also want to be your own individual? Like, where's the separation between
mm,
the individual and the collective? Unfortunately, we seem to think that you can only have one or the other in Western culture, when you absolutely, and this is something I learned in Peru as well, the individual and the collective go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. So
hmm.
it's not either or, it's both and. So, yeah, so I have no aspirations to be a comedian, but I do like funny people a lot.
Mm. And do you like them more now than you ever have before? Like
No,
before this
I think I've always really liked funny people.
I
People who
see.
could, because I think you have to be really smart to be really funny.
Yeah.
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 I remember in college, I went to NYU, and my next door neighbor in the dorm was this guy who was the funniest person I'd ever met. And I had not really spent a lot of time around funny people. And I'm just like, how does he do that? I actually, I would like to be that smart or funny or something. Yeah.
Yeah, when somebody laughs at, something that you do, yeah, there's a rush there. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I've never done stand-up comedy, but I've spoken to a lot, and I do enjoy the art, and it does seem great, but it seems like it still seems daunting and a lot of hard work.
Yes. I think it's a lot of hard work to look spontaneous.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And you casually mentioned discipline. So certainly I asked the guest. I mean, so just as you as a professor, an anthropologist, an author, a so many hats. I mean, do you consider yourself disciplined?
It's funny. One of the reasons I was really excited to come on your show is to talk about that, because uh, I think about discipline a lot and what it means, because people always say to me, "You're so disciplined," because
Really?
I do a lot. And I can't somehow connect with that word for myself, at
Mm,
least in terms of my work, because I love it so much. It's the
mm,
thing that sometimes, I'm a kid at Christmas most of the time, especially if I'm working on a project. I can't wait to get up at 5 a.m. and start working.
good for you.
The person who's disciplined is the mom who has 3 kids, who's getting up at 5 in the morning because that's the
Mm,
only time she has during the day. I don't have children, so that's not my situation. I'm getting up because that's the time I work best, and I'm excited to get up and I want to get to it. So I was thinking about this and thinking about the question, is it discipline if you love it?
right.
In your discussions, have you come to any sort of conclusion about, or thought about, you know, does discipline always have to be a punishment of some kind or a struggle.
It's fascinating because I oftentimes get real pushback, uh, I don't like discipline. We need more compassion than discipline, and uh, I get a very there's no wrong answer, right? What's the genesis? I lost a lot of weight, and people wanted a quick answer as to how I did it, and I said, "Hey, it was just discipline," which is just another word for just self discipline and focus. You
Mhm.
know, I fall short in discipline in a lot of areas. So your question is, you know, some people have a militant definition of discipline. You do this at this time and you never break it. And some people have a looser, it's more self-discipline, but I always do it, but maybe not at the same time. Or I always kind of, when I'm focused, I can get real things done. So i I don't have the answer, and that's why I talk to great people like yourself and interesting people like yourself to try to figure out what it may be. Do you think Puma would consider himself disciplined?
Hmm. That's a great question. I wish he was here, he could answer it. I
Mm,
can't answer it for him. I suspect, and this is just really my projection, he would probably go, "Wait, what?" He
mm,
probably wouldn't even really care about the word. He would say, I do what I need to do when I need to do it. I mean, he's not a perfect person, he's no
right.
saint, but he he grows the corn when the corn needs to be grown, and he takes care of his kids when they need to be taken care of, and I'm not sure that word really plays a huge role. I think, hmm, I mean, not to speak too generally, but we do have that American can-do attitude that,
Mm, yes.
we can do if we get up and do it.
Certainly, we work a
Yeah.
lot, and
Mhm.
I have relatives in Italy, and when I go there, they ask me how many hours I work a week, and I tell them 40 to 45, and they slam their hands on the table and say, "What is that's why you have gray hair," and so it's so different. And how about in stand-up comedy? Do you think it takes discipline for those comics to be funny and to do what they do?
Oh, well, it would all I can say it would take discipline for me if I were in
Right.
there. I mean, I'm sure they love what they do. I think you have to love what you do, and you have to be, compelled by the spirit of stand-up comedy to do it, and keep doing it because it seems so hard to me. And there are so many times when you bomb. And as one comedian said to me, the beautiful thing about stand-up comedy is it has forced me to get comfortable with failure
Mm.
because you fail over and over again. And so, what does it take to fail over and over again and get up again? Is it discipline? Or is it this just knowing that this is what you're meant to do and really this is the only thing that feeds you? But
Humility.
yeah, yeah,
So many things.
yeah. Faith, trust.
Faith,
Yeah,
trust, yeah. I
yeah.
mean, as an author, I mean, how do you deal with the blank page?
I have no problem with a blank page. There
Hmm,
is no blank page. For
fascinating.
me, because it's partly, I think, the way I work. I am for sure not I'm a quilter. I can't consider myself as a writer, I'm a quilter.
Mm,
I do not start at word 1 with the intent to go to, word 50,000 or
right,
whatever. I don't
Z,
go
yeah.
from A to Z. Every morning I sit down if I'm working on a project and it's time to really write and just write from where I'm at. What am I
Hmm,
excited about in that day that has something to do with what I'm working on? So I will write, in a few hours, let's say 5 to 10 pages, maybe if it's a
wow.
really good day. So, sometimes only 3. And of those 5 to 10 pages, maybe if I'm lucky, 3 will go in there because they'll be good and they'll be the nub of something that will grow from there. And once I've got kind of a notebook full of ideas and thoughts, I start picking through them, start finding the things that are really the gems, start expanding upon them, sewing them together, and suddenly I have a book. So there's no blank page. It's just a place to put whatever I'm thinking about in the moment. And if you really go in with the attitude of whatever we write is fine. This is wherever the energy is today is exactly what's supposed to end up on the page.
And do you journal?
I don't journal. I wish that's one place I feel I don't have discipline
Hmm,
is journaling, especially when I'm not writing. I do think that that would be helpful. Why don't I journal? I'm not sure. I
Hmm.
think I maybe I am such a sort of focused person that I do need to have a some sense of where I'm aiming rather than writing compulsively.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you meditate?
On occasion, not regularly, when I need
Hmm.
it.
And how do you know when you need it?
I would say when feels like the world is closing down, I'm
Mm.
feeling overwhelming anxiety, when I feel lost. I think that's when,
Hmm.
really actually I started meditating a lot right before I went to Berlin, which is
Hmm.
interesting that that coincided. And it was a time in my career that I really sort of felt like, okay, I don't know what my path is right now. I don't know what I should be doing.
Hmm.
And I do find that the meditation will put me in a place where, not unlike San Pedro, where all the cobwebs just kind of go away. And it is that, in a way, a blank page. Okay, where, and it is, yeah, it's facing that blank page and going, where's my energy? Where's my love? Where's my passion? Where's my excitement? Go there.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Out of the many hats that you wear, do you consider yourself one more than the other? An author, a professor,
Hmm.
a anthropologist, a
Hmm. Not
wife, a
really. Well, no, I would say I try to. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. I feel like there's so many ways I could answer that. I love that question. I mean, on the one hand, you have anthropologist, professor, writer, and
Mhm.
then there's wife. And I would say, logically, I think to myself, the first three tend to be professional, and the final
Right.
one is personal. On the other hand, there is no separation. I mean, fortunately, I'm married to an artist, and
Yes,
he is
photographer.
the, yeah,
Mm.
photographer, the most supportive human being I can imagine, the kindest, most fun, supportive cheerleader I could ever ask for. So yeah, he sets a stage and a grounding for me, I would say, that is indispensable for what I do.
Hmm.
I mean, there is something to be said for, I think people also call me not quite disciplined, but in the fact that, I'm not afraid to leave home and go to some strange
Ah,
country culture, on not so much a whim, but, chasing down an idea. And it's certainly helpful knowing that I have a huge support system back home. I've got that grounding and that tether. And I think that is quite important.
do you consider him disciplined, your
Oh,
husband?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
What a quick answer.
Oh, yeah. He is. And again, is he disciplined, or he loves what he does so much?
Mm.
He is the most enthusiastic person I've ever met in my entire life. And his that enthusiasm comes out in his work. He gets up at 5 in the morning and goes off to his studio and can't wait to, see
Wow.
what the day brings in terms of the clouds or the stones on the beach or whatever he's photographing. So, yeah, I mean, he certainly is. Both tend to be very disciplined. So I would say, actually, one of the disciplines we have to do for each other is remember to come back together
Mm.
and spend time together, um, consistently. I mean, we always do spend time to consistently, and it is exciting having somebody who goes off and does something that he's so enthusiastic about, because then I get to feel like I live two lives at once, because he'll come back and
Mm.
tell me all about it. But that is, I mean, that is sort of maybe possibly the shadow side of discipline, is remembering self-care and
Mm.
remembering to go sit on the beach with a loved one, or go have a beer with a loved one, or go see your family.
Absolutely. I think it covers all of that. And do you hold each other accountable in your discipline, do you think?
Can you say more about what you mean by that?
So you say you feel he's really disciplined. I wonder if he feels that way with you. And do you think that you help him with his discipline by holding him accountable in some way, by making sure he's out of the door, or making sure he, looking at his art and his offerings?
No, he needs no help from me to be disciplined
Wow.
at all. As just as I don't really need help from him to be disciplined, although it's
Mm,
helpful to have a partner who supports our supports my enthusiasm
mm.
and says, "You want to go to Berlin? Have a great time.
Wow.
Text me, send me some
Wow.
pictures. I'll see you when you get back."
Wow.
There's nothing like that, Yeah, yeah, I would say we in the way that we support each other to be disciplined is by letting each other be disciplined.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would say we trust each other not just with our lives, our physical lives, our emotional lives, but with our professional lives as well. And in that way, we're a great team. And he will give me feedback on my work if I want it, but he doesn't
Mm.
give it unless I ask for it.
That's
I
right.
will give him feedback on his work, but I don't give it unless he asks for it. Because frankly, I don't really know enough about photography to have an
Right.
opinion. So,
Is it rewarding being a professor?
oh yeah, it absolutely is, and I teach at Goddard College in Vermont, which is a low residency program, and I'm in the Graduate Institute.
I see.
Goddard is a very special place, very special. It's one of the foci of the teaching there is we ask students to come from the lens of knowing, being, and doing. So the beautiful thing about Goddard is it allows students to really take whatever subjects of interest to them and do a final project pertaining to it.
Wow.
So let's see if I can have a good example that I can actually use. Well, they take really any subject. So it could be shamanism. Let's say I had a student who was working on shamanism. I would expect of them
Hmm.
to know the literature of shamanism and just, what the main theories are in the books and in the lectures and the whatever that's out there. But I would also ask them to come from their downloading knowing, which
Hmm.
is their being. Like, why is this important to you? Why do you think that these practices are important? And then the doing, how does knowing about these practices and being part of these practices, how does that help the world? How does that help your sphere of influence? And so we really take a very holistic perspective to learning at Goddard, which is great, especially for people who don't really enjoy just learning from books and really
Hmm.
want to know that whatever they're deciding to learn and study and produce really comes from their passion as a person. Yeah. So
That
it's
sounds
it's all
wonderful.
yeah, and I get to I mean, what's beautiful is these students come in with such interesting, diverse backgrounds and topics, and the nice thing about the way Goddard work is I don't have to be an expert on the subject, I just have to know how to help them articulate what they wanna say and
Hmm.
get from point A to point B, and so I end up being a student as well as a teacher because I get to learn along with them about their subject.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's a nice dance between the 2.
It is, and I would say, one of the most rewarding things is maybe having a Zoom conference with one of the students who if they're stuck, and just talking to them about their subject and, like, what is it that makes you passionate about it? What gets you excited? And sometimes nobody's ever asked them of that before, and so they
Hmm.
feel like maybe they have to write about it in a certain way, a very academic way. I'm like, "No, you could do a creative project around it." And to sort of see the light in their eyes when they find that thing that they want to dedicate themselves to and they wanna be disciplined towards and have
Hmm.
that passionate connection to is really exciting.
Hillary Webb, what motivates you?
Hmm. Wow. I am motivated. I think one of the main ones is expanding my blinders. I
Hmm.
I really want to see as much of the world as I can, and I don't necessarily mean I want to travel to every country in the world. I I think I became an anthropologist because I wanted to get out of my own way in a lot of ways, and I
Hmm.
needed tools for getting out of my own way. And how do I show up in the world the most effectively? How do I reach my own potential, whatever that looks like? What tools are there in other cultures and other I don't know, topics of study that can help lead me to me being as effective in the world as I can be.
Hmm.
And how do I bring that out into the world?
What a wonderful answer. I'm soaking it in. Almost gave me chills. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Absolutely
Thanks for
wonderful.
asking.
Yeah. And how do you define success?
For myself, it's funny. As I say in my book, I grew up, very shy kid, had some learning issues. I think I was probably, the kid that nobody really thought much was going to come out of,
Hmm.
not much. So for me, success came from with the publishing my first book, because that was more than I ever could have dreamed for myself.
Wow.
So in some ways, I feel I've already succeeded, and the rest is just the frosting on the cake. So I feel like I've succeeded because I surpassed whatever I could have imagined for myself, and I think maybe even possibly what other people could have imagined for me. And I'm a really happy person, and I love what I do, and I'm privileged and lucky enough to be in a situation where I can follow the questions that excite me to the end of the line and beyond. And I can't think of, I've got a great relationship, beautiful friends, and I can't think of what possibly I could ask for more.
Did you use that? You mentioned in the beginning there that you thought perhaps others didn't think much would happen of you. Did you use that as fuel at all?
In some ways, possibly, is, you know, I've being fairly driven.
Hmm.
I'm sure that within that there's some drive to prove to myself that, I'm not that dyslexic little kid,
Hmm.
that I have something meaningful to offer. So, there is some of that, but I think that desire to prove turned into great love and passion for existence,
Hmm.
because it that desire to go beyond myself pushed me into situations that I might have shied away from if I didn't have that motivating me. And being thrown into these weird, weird situations, doing San Pedro on the top of a mountain,
Yeah.
or sitting in the basement of a comedy club listening to, a Croatian talk about, his life living in Berlin. Uh, yeah, I there's nothing like getting out of your comfort zone, getting out of your
Hmm.
hometown, and just allowing yourself to soak up the world. And I do feel that as an anthropologist, I am in a position where my job is to go out and try to be a blank slate and
Hmm.
ask questions. There are times when I'm a tourist as well in places and I'm not seeking out a question, and that's fun too, but it's usually like, okay, how many experiences can I take home with me? How many monuments can I see?
Hmm.
But to be infused by other people's humanity and preciousness and passion and pain is a remarkable thing to be able to do.
It certainly is. I I generally think that I have more questions than I have answers, and I think you seem to share that.
Absolutely. The questions are fun. Who'd
Right.
want who'd want who'd want answers? I mean, answers are
Yeah.
frozen and stagnant, and we should all be asking more questions than trying to come up with declarative statements.
Absolutely. And I reserve the right to change my mind on any subject given new evidence. Can you imagine
Exactly.
if the
Exactly.
world shared in that viewpoint, Hillary? Can you imagine?
What a world it would be. We'd
Instead of
probably get
digging
less.
in.
I know, I know. Again, I mean, maybe we would get less done,
Yeah, we might. Yeah.
and that's okay. I feel
Yeah.
like there are things that we do we don't need to do. What
That's
if we
right.
actually took 5 more minutes of our day to think about this, another person's perspective in a way that allows us to be like, "Okay, maybe that's not my perspective, but I can see an opening there." But we're not really trained that way by our
No,
politicians
no,
or
we're not. Yeah, unfortunately, we're not. Perhaps this conversation can change that.
we can only hope.
We can only hope.
We should
And
take people we'll
I
take people down
continue.
to Peru.
That's another thing. Yeah, go to other places. I when I was 10 years old, my father was an Italian immigrant. My first day of school vacation, summer vacation, third grade, he gives me a suitcase and says, put your clothes in here. I live in New Haven, Connecticut. It's a little south of you. He proceeds to bring me to the bus station, tells the bus driver to drop me off Terminal 1 at JFK, gives me a picture of my grandmother. You're going to meet your grandmother in Milan. So I go to Italy by myself as a 10-year-old, and I meet my grandmother and my uncle, and I meet all my relatives, and I proceed to spend every other summer in Italy and Switzerland. And it just gave me the education that shaped my life. It's just a completely different way of living. And when I explain it back to my American friends, they don't understand. And when I explain it to my Italian relatives, they don't understand. And it's just you have to get out of your comfort zone.
And I'm impressed that you did it at age 10. I think that's great. I had similar parents where they said, "Okay, we're gonna travel now, and now you're gonna travel alone, so off with
Wow.
you." And I don't know, it'd be interesting if you agree or disagree, but I think there is something about learning how to travel on your own that makes you realize, "I got this.
That's right.
I got this." There's a solution for every problem.
Yeah, certainly if my father sent, if any adult sent a 10-year-old to Europe by themselves, they might be arrested now. But I mean, I had no, I just asked people and, I had no fear. What is there to fear for? I can't wait to meet my grandmother and I can't wait to meet my cousins. And, this is the way to get there. And, you don't have any fear of that, and away you went. Hillary Webb, thank you
Mhm.
so much for your time today. My goodness. It's such a pleasure. How can we get in touch with you?
Yes, I would love anybody who would like to learn more about me, my work, or get in touch to go to my website, which is hillaryswebb.com, HILLARY, S as in Sam, WEBB.com. Yeah.
And you've got a great YouTube site as well, Instagram. Your books are all available on your website and on Amazon. And thank you so much for your time today. I'm so fortunate I get to speak to people like yourself, and I can only hope that anyone listening and watching feel the same way. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.